The sea was calm that evening, the tide breathing slowly in and out like a giant asleep. Waves folded gently onto the shore, leaving behind trails of foam and smooth stones. Overhead, the sky had begun to slip into that soft shade between lavender and blue, the kind of color that only appeared right before twilight took hold. At the edge of Driftwood Point, where the coast bent inward like a sleepy arm around a quiet cove, stood a lighthouse. It hadn't shown its light for many years, not since ships had stopped sailing so close to the coast, but still it stood, steady and tall. Its white stones had been weathered by time and sea winds, and its lantern glass caught the setting sun like a jewel. The lighthouse had long been empty until April moved in. She had come to Driftwood Point looking for quiet, the kind of quiet you couldn't find in a city, where silence always buzzed with something just beneath the surface. Here, the quiet was different, deeper, honest. It came with the rustling of dune grass, the distant cry of gulls, and the rhythmic hush of the ocean brushing the sand. The cottage beside the lighthouse was small, but full of character, its windows fogged from salt air, its porch wrapped in old wood that creaked in rhythm with the sea. Inside, April filled it with soft blankets, the scent of warm tea, and a record player that whispered gentle songs into the early hours of evening. She would spend her days painting, or reading by the wide window that looked out across the cove. In the evenings, she walked the shore with her shoes in her hand, feeling the cool tide tease at her toes. It was during one of these twilight walks, just as the sky had turned dusky pink, that she saw him. A figure, alone, walking slowly where the sand met the water. He held something in his hands, what looked like a small journal, and every so often he'd stop, look up at the sea, and write something down. April didn't speak to him the first time, or the second, but she noticed how he always came at the same hour, how he walked in silence, respectful of the hush the ocean kept. There was something calming about his presence, like driftwood smoothed by tide and time. One evening, as April was sitting on the porch sipping tea, she saw him again. This time, he looked up, spotted her, and offered a quiet nod. She returned it with a small smile. The next evening, he stopped at the gate. "Evening," he said, voice gentle. "Evening," she replied. He gestured toward the sea. "Nice place to think." April nodded. "It listens better than most people do." He smiled at that, a soft, slow kind of smile. "I'm Noah," he said, "staying in the little gray cottage, just past the dunes." "April, the lighthouse is mine." "Nice to meet you, April of the lighthouse." And from there, a rhythm began to grow. They saw each other most evenings, sometimes on the sand, sometimes on her porch. Noah brought stories of the sea, of the coral reefs he'd studied, and the whales he'd followed across distant waters. April listened, her chin resting in her palm, the horizon glowing behind her like a painting. In return, she shared little pieces of her own story, how she'd been a museum curator once, how she loved the way storms sounded on rooftops, and how the sea reminded her of something she couldn't quite remember, like a dream half lost on waking. Some nights, they would walk in silence, letting the waves fill the spaces between their footsteps. On others, they'd talk about the stars, or the way the moonlight silvered the water. April started finding little treasures left on her porch rail, an unusually shaped shell, a feather striped like marble, a piece of sea glass the color of mist. She never saw him leave them, but she always knew it was Noah. One day, when the air was heavy with the scent of coming rain, April invited him inside. He stepped in carefully, as though the place were made of glass. He noticed the soft blankets, the scattered books, the canvas half finished beside the window. He ran his fingers gently across the spines of novels, stopping at a collection of poems. "This place suits you," he said. Later that evening, the rain came down in soft sheets, and the two of them sat by the fire, drinking tea and listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the windows. Noah told her about bioluminescence, how some creatures in the deep lit up like stars. April imagined them drifting through dark water like floating lanterns, glowing blue and gold. It felt easy, this quiet between them, natural, like the sea meeting the shore. Weeks passed, the summer stretching long and slow. The sun lingered later each night, and the breeze off the ocean carried warmth instead of chill. One evening, April stood at the base of the lighthouse stairs, looking up. The sky behind it was a sheet of indigo velvet, scattered with stars. She turned to Noah. "Want to see the view from the top?" The stairs groaned under their weight as they climbed, spiraling gently toward the sky. At the top, the lantern room was wrapped in thick glass, slightly fogged with salt. From there, they could see the whole cove, waves folding gently into the shore, lights from distant boats flickering like fireflies, the dunes lying still like sleeping giants. Noah stood beside her, arms resting on the railing. "You ever feel like this place exists out of time?" he asked. April nodded. "Every day." He looked at her then, his expression soft. "I think that's why I stayed." They stood there a long while, not speaking, letting the moment stretch like the tide, full and steady. Eventually, they descended in silence, fingers brushing once on the railing, not needing to say more. From that night on, something shifted. They didn't talk about it, didn't rush it, but the way they moved around each other changed, like two currents slowly learning to move as one. On nights when sleep wouldn't come, April would open her window and hear his quiet footsteps in the sand below. She would leave her porch light on just in case. As the season began to change, with golden light giving way to softer gray, the wind grew cooler and the waves stronger. Yet the peace between them remained. One morning, April awoke to find a note tucked beneath a shell on her windowsill. "Come walk with me." She met him by the shore, the sky just beginning to blush with morning light. They walked without words for a long time, until they reached the rocks at the far end of the cove. There, Noah turned to her. "I was supposed to leave last week," he said. April looked at him. "But you didn't." He shook his head. "I think I found what I was looking for." And with that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny compass. Old, the brass dulled with age. "I used to carry this when I traveled," he said, "but I don't need it anymore. I know where I'm supposed to be." April took it from him, her fingers warm against the cool metal, and she smiled. The waves crashed softly nearby. The lighthouse stood behind them, quiet and tall. And in that moment, beneath the dawn and the steady pull of the tide, two hearts, like the sea and the shore, found a place to rest.